It's the go-home show for AEW Dynamite for All In 2024. This was on August 21st in Cardiff, Wales, as we get a little bit of a balanced approach tonight in the booking. Some were hits, and others were simply not. But it did push the narrative forward. It did get us ready to roll with All In this weekend. Should be shaping up to be the biggest pay-per-view of the year for AEW. But let's see how this highlights and delights go for tonight's AEW Dynamite. I'm your host, Bryan, the Hype Ballard, back at it again with another thoughts, results recap for AEW Dynamite. We get a couple title matches mixed in for good measure, building suspense to the lineup. But let's get in. I want to talk to you guys and thank you for the fans of ProWrestling.com. Lots of great podcasts over there. Check us out. Wrestling Fans Inside. All of my teammates doing our thing there. But the show opens up with Tony Schiavone in the ring for a contract signing for AEW TBS Championship. And that match at All In is Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, and Mercedes Moné, who of course is joined by Camille, her bodyguard. We get the contract signing here, and Tony does remind them that there is no physical violence to take place between the two contestants. Mercedes speaks first, and she says that Britt Baker is the past and she'll forever be the future before she picks up and signs the contract. Britt says that's really cute, but she remembers when Moné hobbled in on crutches to watch her at last year's All In. Wasn't even a part of the company, but came to watch the DMD. She also signs her contract. Moné mocks the crowd for doing the DMD, and she gets back saying that she was a CEO. At this point, Britt talks about how she ultimately claims that the CEO was the blueprint, but Baker says she's the gold standard. And when Mercedes was one of four, she was just one of one and the baddest bitch on the block. But she got one thing right. She did admire Moné and wanted her she walked so the girls like Britt could run and actually make a difference in the business. We then get a counter promo out of Mercedes Moné talking about how she didn't have to go to college to get a degree to back up if she didn't make it in this business. She truly was all in. This is how you do a contract signing, and AEW does do their contract signings really well in this era, and it did build excitement for me in this match. Two solid promos, even though Mercedes got that WWE type promo to her. I like what they're doing in this feud, and I am excited, and it almost felt like this should have been the world title, but we forget that this is only for the TBS Championship. But these two girls have done such a great job with this that it's got me thinking and forgetting about the title very quickly because these two are making it happen. We get a lot of good stuff there, and it ultimately ends with Camille and Britt Baker getting into it as Mercedes Moné leave and head out towards All In. Up next, we didn't get the Dynamite Kid, Tommy Billington, getting his AEW Dynamite debut against Chris the Learning Tree Jericho. Ultimately, I want to say this, Billington is Dynamite Kid. He is the nephew of the Dynamite Kid, the late great Dynamite Kid. And ultimately, Billington with an arm drag out of the gates, an arm lock, collar and elbow, Jericho with a wrist lock, Tommy Billington off the rope, shoulder blocks, taking Chris off his feet with a third scoop and a slam in a row. Ultimately, this matchup, back and forth, and I gotta say, Billington really hangs every single time I see him. The kid is smooth. The kid is pretty dang good in the ring. I'm excited to see what AEW, now that they signed him, is going to do with him. But he does get a little bit of a rub against Chris Jericho in this one. And they go to commercial and then back. Both men are actually down in the ring after clashing bodies right in the middle with a crossbody. Then we get a little bit further, a German suplex. We then get a Walls of Jericho spot in which we get basically broken up, and then we get a snap suplex following it up with a whip reverse, a tilt-a-whirl, a tombstone pile driver connecting. Bryan Keith comes out to help out a little bit, but sidestepping, and then Big Bill also out there with Jericho. Tommy goes to the top, but boom! Boom! A code breaker counters the diving headbutt. And it's over. 1, and a 2, and a 3. Chris Jericho wins with the code breaker. Post-match, we get Jericho cutting promo on Hook, saying if he was here, he would tear him apart. And guess what? Hook is here. Come on, you're fighting him this week, and you should know that. But he gets right in the ring, squares up with Jericho. Taz mentions that his son does not need his help at all during this interaction and match. But we get Big Bill blindsiding Hook and chokeslams him, giving him the advantage going into the weekend for the learning tree. Not a bad little quick matchup. I was more excited in this one. Not necessarily for the Chris Jericho Hook stuff, but I was more excited to watch Tommy Billington kind of get a little bit of a bubbly rub against Chris Jericho here in the main first matchup of AEW Dynamite. Good stuff. I want to see more from the kid and what they do with this Dynamite one. Ultimately, when we move ahead, we get a AEW World Women's title match. Not the TBS, the World title match. That is Timeless Toni Storm defending against Saraya. I gotta say, Saraya, formerly Paige in the WWE, has only had one match this year. She's 1-0. Timeless Toni Storm is about 16-0 in 2024. Looking very flawless as champion. But we do get Saraya versus Toni Storm. And the reason we do is this is Saraya's home country, home area, homelands, that she's, getting the home crowd favorite here. We get a collar and elbow. We get an arm drag Storm back to the lockup, another arm drag, a headlock. And we gotta ask why Saraya's getting this title match. There was no tournament one. There was no really anything. I would have liked to seen Saraya get a couple wins leading into this, which then could have ultimately still, the end game here is going to be Mariah May. We all know that with Timeless Toni Storm in that feud. But we do get some mirroring in this matchup. And what I mean by that is we get some back and forth. You can tell the girls have not worked with each other too often, but they just kind of got their timing. It took a little bit to get the timing going, and then they were able to really kick it into gear. But Saraya firing on the apron. They did some mirroring, like I said, kind of just mirroring each other's moves back and forth. And then, ultimately, Storm snaps off a DDT, a fisherman suplex, and she's stalking the ring. Saraya captures a DDT herself. Toni gets her hands on the ropes, though. We get a sky high for a 1 and a 2. Harley Cameron gets on the apron to interfere, but Storm cuts her off with a lip lock. A little bit of a lip lock, and that old classic move. 1 for Saraya also. Toni Storm ends up winning with the Storm Zero for the 3 count and the pinfall, retaining the AEW Women's World Championship. Post-match, Mariah May attacks out of nowhere with the shoe that she laid Toni Storm out with previously, cradling her in the much famous pose that she did when she bloodied Toni Storm. And soon, Mariah dumps her onto the mat, making ring angels, laying in the ring. Storm is still down and out, just soaking it all in for the Owen Hart winner. Ospreay gets on the mic later on here, but what we ultimately do get is the finish to this match. I want to say Saraya has been playing the Italian Neidhart role of AEW. I'm sure she's helping a lot behind the scenes. However, I would like to see something a little more done with Saraya in the future if she is able to wrestle full time. We don't really know her health or kind of what's going on there, but I do wish her the best. And this was about Toni Storm and Mariah May, and at the end of the day, I was more excited about Storm and Bray and their showdown at the pay-per-view this week, and it did its job there. But Storm, Mariah May, definitely going to happen, and I'm excited. But I will say, on paper, Paige versus Toni Storm should be a good match. It just did not deliver the way I was hoping to in this one. Let's move ahead. We've got a face-to-face with Will Ospreay, as promised, and MJF coming out, doing his best Uncle Sam impersonation, wearing a all-American flag type suit. Don't know if that really fit him overall. I kind of like when he's a little bit more of his iconic look. But ultimately, we get interaction between the two, and here we are in the middle of the crowd. We get Will Ospreay playing to his home country. We get some back and forth of who are ya? And ultimately, we get Will Ospreay asking if they interfere. He asks Tony Schiavone, and he says, hey, you got Tony Khan on the mic, right? And he says, basically, what's the fine and it's $125,000 if he attacks MJF. MJF baits him, and then he ultimately says he doesn't care about that, and he says it's worth it, and then they go at it, and then there is security hitting the ring. I've never seen so much security in my life, all swarming the ring, all getting into it, pulling these two apart. It built and felt like a main event pull apart here, but I was proud of AEW for putting this exactly where it was on Dynamite and not overshadowing the World Heavyweight Champion of AEW. And again, this played to the crowd. It got its job done. Let's move ahead. We balance out that little segment with a Okada versus Casanoli AEW Continental Championship matchup live here on Dynamite. And what we ultimately get is a little bit of a methodically slower, technical paced matchup. And ultimately, we get to a point where these two go all the way to the distance. 20-minute time limit on this one, and we actually get a 20-minute time clock expiration on this one from Okada and Claudio. These guys were just kind of gearing up a little bit for the weekend, but we do get ultimately the right winner here in Okada. Actually, with a 20-minute limit draw, I guess, kind of keeping the title is what I'm really saying is like the more important piece here. We get some, back and forth 2 counts, but it didn't really hurt either competitor in this matchup, but it really just kind of filled a little bit on the card and gave us a little bit of a taste of this continuing feud. And then we get the Young Bucks coming to ringside at the end, and they ask, who wants 5 more minutes? But of course, they actually don't give that up because they are a stickler for the rules, and they do not get this anymore. However, we do get entrances for our next matchup, which is going to be the final matchup of the evening. Darby Allin and FTR versus the Elite, Jack Perry, Matt, and Nick Jackson. And they get their entrance. The Acclaim comes out and cuts a promo. Max Caster calls FTR the court jesters and Young Bucks princesses, while he and Anthony Bowens are kings. And then on Sunday, it's nut up or shut up, but tonight they have nothing left to prove. So ultimately, the trios matchup, going back and forth in this one, we get a really quick matchup going on between these guys and a little bit of a brawl. And then we actually get what I like to end the show with. We ended with the world champion getting a promo on AEW Dynamite tonight. So, again, I want to applaud AEW for putting their champion in a go-home show in the main event slot as a promo. Did a really good job of showing Swerve Strickland of why he's the champion. And then we get Bryan Danielson making his way to the ring, as he is going to be getting his title shot at All In this weekend. And I felt like they just did its job, and it felt very, like where it should be placed on this card. I got to ask you guys, it is Bryan Danielson's career versus the championship of Swerve Strickland. And I got to wonder where this is going to end. Could Swerve Strickland truly end Bryan Danielson's career? I'm kind of starting to wonder. Or will this just end in kind of a hook or crook finish style? And will this end in a crook style finish where we could get another matchup a couple weeks later at the next pay-per-view? Well, those are kind of my over thoughts on the show, but let's get into the final thoughts. Hit that like button if you like AEW. Helps me out, helps you out. Again, thank you all for new subscribers. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. I'm here to talk wrestling. I'm a fan like you. So, tonight, AEW did a good job booking their main event as Swerve Strickland, proving that a champion should always go last. And if they aren't last on the card, then they have no business being their champion. Also, they did a really strong contract signing, showing us what they were good at with Mercedes Moné in the opening against her opponent on Sunday. We also had a nice little balance segments in between. Not a bad card overall, and it did its job to remind us of why we're watching the pay-per-view on Sunday at All In. Also tonight, we did get a TV taping for AEW Collision, but that won't air until Saturday night, kind of adding a little bit more sizzle to the steak. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I thank each and every one of you, and I'll see you this weekend for All In. Like, share, subscribe. And it's not goodbye, it's game over.